Hi and welcome everyone. Today in this webinar, we're going to cover the topic of expediting the medical writing process, how to apply data integration and structured content authoring. In our session today, we're going to cover three different areas. The first one is we're going to do an introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about the concepts we're discussing, and we're going to review what they mean. The second thing is we're going to give some examples. So we'll take a look at a software and how you're taking these concepts and applying them through software to achieve your goals. And then the third thing we'll do is we'll look at the benefits. We'll look at the benefits of each of the types of capabilities and what you gain from utilizing them. Today I'll be hosting the webinar. My name is Trevor Standish. I am the Director of Product Management. I'm the Director for all authoring and submission technologies here at Certara. For those of you who don't know, Certara's mission and vision, we're here to transform drug discovery and development by accelerating medicines to patients with our end-to-end software. Today, we'll be looking really at a software specific to the area of medical writing, but we have other webinars on other topics as well. So when we talk to medical writers, the goals are often very ambitious, but there's really not a clear path to achieve these goals. So what do we mean by that? Often we hear something like this: we want to reduce our cycle time by 50% in the next 2 years. Sometimes it's worded a little differently. So you might say we want to reduce our cycle time by 5 to 10% every year for the next 5 years, let's say, or some kind of flavor of that. It's said in a couple different ways, but more or less the theme is consistent. And we hear this across organizations, teams, and individuals in the medical writing space. And so we talk to medical writers and we ask a lot of questions and we say, well, how are you going to do that? How will you achieve this lofty goal? And oftentimes the answers are not that great, or they say, well, we're going to become more efficient through our project management and tracking, or hey, we're going to expand our team by adding more medical writers to just be able to have faster turnaround times. But these answers are sometimes ambiguous. And the biggest thing is there's no clear path oftentimes put into place for how this would be done with the existing tools, because we hear that medical writing often has not really changed in the last 15 to 20 years. So if you got into medical writing 20 years ago, the way you're doing it today is probably very similar if you're using those similar tools. When we think about medical writing and really regulatory content, we really know that not all the content is created equally. And so what we mean by this is that if you were to break down the content in a report and talk about it a little bit differently in these buckets, we have three buckets that emerge. The first one is content referencing, which makes up the lion's share of the content. And so this is referring to or utilizing previously written content. It could be something like a paragraph or a piece of text. It also could be a piece of like data or a table, for example, or an image. The second one that's extremely prevalent is content reuse. So content reuse is taking some piece of previously provided information and instead of referencing it, reusing it for some other purpose. So this could be summarizing, let's say, a document. So summarizing it down to a couple sentences or a paragraph. Or if you have a big table of data, extracting some key insights or values from that and writing, let's say, a summarization of that table. So reusing that information. And so this is the second largest bucket. And then the third one we refer to as de novo content. So this is what we call original authoring, traditional hands on the keyboard, where you have to come up with an idea and synthesize information into the words on the keyboard. So this is a general example of these types of different content that make it into a report. And I would say in general, the makeup of this content in terms of the percentages, it will change based on kind of two different factors. I think the first factor is one, what is the writing style or standards within the organization? That will determine if, let's say, there's more content reused versus content referencing. So the percentages can change based on organizations and teams and writers. And then the other variable that goes into this is the type of document you're writing. So this will change quite dramatically just depending on if you were, for example, writing a lay summary versus if you're writing a clinical study report. A lay summary will have a lot more de novo content because of the nature of the writing, versus a clinical study report, you're going to have a higher degree of referencing and reuse because a lot of information just coming from, let's say, tables from biostats or from a protocol or SAP. When we look at medical writing, long cycle times are really present in all of medical writing. And so what we mean by that is that if we take a look at one document, and this document, for example, we're going to talk about a clinical study report. The cycle time, when we talk about cycle time being all activities associated with writing a report. It could be reviewing, QCing, adding data, styling, formatting, all of the above, selecting a template. All those activities go into cycle time. So if you look at kind of an industry average, and we're taking really generalized averages here, but if you look at industry average about total time to complete a clinical study report, it's roughly 5 days total. So whether you spent 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 weeks on it, just depending on your contribution, if you sum up everyone's contribution, it's roughly 5 days of total work. And oftentimes there's multiple contributors to this 5 days, which is why this is very uncommon. I would say just not industry standard. And so if, take a poll, how many of us on this webinar today are writing a clinical study report essentially in a 1 week period, a 5 day period? And it's really unanimous. Nobody's doing that, right? So this is the aspirational goal that medical writing teams aspire to reduce that cycle time. How do we get this type of report down to 5 days? If we look at cycle time in a different lens, so what does it take from the beginning of a clinical study report writing to the completed clinical study report writing? And so this is from selecting your template all the way to a fully finished CSR that's been reviewed and approved and it's ready to go. A general industry average is 26 days, almost a month time. And so again, that takes into account reviews, writing, QCing, updating data, all the nuances, hyperlinking that goes into building a report of this importance. And then the third cycle time we look at is database lock to a completed CSR. So in this case, what we see is the average is about 83 days. So from when we get that final data from the database lock to that finalized CSR, it's almost a 3-month period. And again, this can vary widely based on a lot of different variables in your organization, like team size, whether you do all things in-house, what tools you're using, if you outsource, etc. But just to give you a sense kind of what is the makeup of this cycle time of 83 days. And this is made up of several different factors. You have things like data finalization happening. So collecting, making sure it's all completed. So data validation, preparing files, preparing the STTM files and making sure it's validated against standards. There's data analysis, so preparing those analysis data sets and tables and figures and listings. There's the delivery component, so making sure they're stored, they're in the location, they've been finalized, and then they've been handed off to the appropriate individuals and teams. And really the last one is where medical writing, in this example at least, comes into play. So this is the data report writing. And so as you can see here, this is really where, if you take that average, let's say 26 days, this is picked up to get to our final clinical study report. And this is just one example, but I think what teams aspire to is how do we get it from that point down to a much smaller time frame. And there's different tools that really address each of these buckets, but the one we're really focused on is the report writing for today's session. And so, those goals is how do organizations and teams have is how do we get from that 26 days, let's say, down to the 5 days. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more. There are really two capabilities that have matured over the last several years, actually, to address this concept of cycle time. And you hear probably a lot about them, or you hear colleagues talk about them in conferences. But the first one is this concept called structured content authoring. And just for all of you that are not familiar with structured content authoring, What this is something referred, and oftentimes it's called component authoring, is the breaking down of documents into small pieces. So for example, if you have 10 paragraphs in one document, that could be broken down into 10 different documents with one single paragraph. And this basically helps make a document into a more digestible piece of information or component. And that allows for maximization of things like referencing, content referencing, and content reusability. The biggest thing here is this actually enables teams to have targeted authoring and really reduce the QC review time to minimize the overall effort and time needed to work on a report. The second capability that's really started to mature the last couple of years is a concept we call data integration. So data integration is not from the sense of a technical sense in terms of data from one system to another, but what we mean by this for the medical writing is data integration is this ability to pull data directly into a report for whatever purpose you have. So whether it's a clinical study report or a patient narrative, anything like that. And what this does is it increases traceability. It really expedites the review process, and it makes it much faster to conclude findings, having that direct integration to the report writing. And so what this really allows for is both draft and final data to flow directly into reports while it's being authored. And it allows for collaboration often not only between writers, but also between the medical writers and the biostatistician team. We now want to look at a couple examples. And to do so, we're going to use one specific tool. So we'll just give a quick intro to that tool, and then we'll look at how those examples are put into practice. The software we're going to be looking at today is a product called Synchrogenix Writer. And this is purpose-built writing software designed to streamline and accelerate that cycle time associated with writing regulatory reports in medical writing. The system itself, it really is based on three key pillars. The first one is to empower teams to focus on key decision points. So this is about data interpretation and message development to drive decisions. The second one is ensuring consistency and quality through standardization. This really comes down to saying the same thing the same way everywhere and building consistency across teams of medical writers in your organization. And the third one is increased team efficiency and accelerating results. And so that really speaks to specifically the cycle time. Typically, what we see is that Synchrogenix Writer customers have three main goals. The first one is about really applying automation with a tool designed specifically for medical writing. And so a lot of organizations are hungry to have capabilities that help address their specific needs. This is a tool specifically for medical writing, so that really helps fulfill that need. The second one is about driving efficiency and reducing those cycle times. So that really speaks to the cycle time we talked about at the beginning, and just speeding up organizational and team efficiencies for multiple benefits. And the third one is integrating that draft and final data seamlessly into reports. And so historically, authoring tools have been entirely independent of data tools, and that's really become a barrier in our industry. So most organizations are looking to have kind of the seamless handoff between unstructured data or structured data and unstructured reports. So there's numerous other types of goals and ideas that customers have, but these are, I'd say, the three main ones. Let's now review how we can take these two techniques of structured content authoring and data integration and apply them to medical writing, and we can jump over and look at the software to see what that looks like. We've opened up Synchrogenix Writer, and now let's take a look at this example. The first concept we're going to look at is the structured content authoring. So in the system, all of these pieces in the headings, the navigation on the left-hand side, are actually independent documents. So I can be collaborating, working in parallel with my teammates. In this case, as an example, I locked a section, and so this would show as a teammate if you are collaborating together. But all of these are independent, and you can work on them whenever you need to. For the concept of structured content authoring, it's not only helpful for working on the document itself, but it's also helpful for that content referencing and content reuse as well. For example, let me go ahead and in this case, if this is our template, I can actually use information that was previously written for the study and some metadata. For example, if I want to pull in this study title, I can do that. I can do that for a study phase or any other piece of information that's available for me to use. Once I do so, I can preview in real time and see what does this look like if I want this to be in my document. In this case, I can see this information here. And if I'd like to do that or I want to add more, I can, and then go ahead and render that for me to write with. Most of the teams using a concept like this actually build their templates so that they automatically have these fields or these components and pieces of data in them, so that when you come in as the first time, most of the clinical study report is actually pre-populated. In that event, if you're ready to use it, then you just hit generate. It will prompt you, and then it will render that text for you to make edits to. Another example is we can use a previously written document. So not only fields or specific pieces of text, but for example, if we wrote our protocol in a legacy system like Word, or if we actually wrote it in the Synchrogenix Writer software, you have access to all of the components and information here as well. So if we want to, I could take it for my study objectives, take this, I can preview it, but I also can pull it in directly into the report. So now I'm actually reusing a piece of content. I can save it, and I'm done. I don't need to QC this. I don't need to make any edits. This is directly pulled from the protocol. So structured content authoring is really helpful to be able to write and do these activities in parallel. But then when it comes to constructing another document that has inputs such as a clinical study report using the inputs from the protocol, they can either automatically populate in the automated e-template, or you can just pull them in without having to make any edits. Again, it really increases team efficiency while also cutting down on the amount of typing and reviewing. And so if you go back here, for example, if we look at our title page that we generated, this is now generated, and we can now start to make any edits as we need as well. Using the same CSR, now let's look at that second concept of data integration. So in this case, we're going to scroll down and let's go to a couple sections we made to talk about this. So data integration is really helpful for several different types of reports and several different areas within a report. In this example, we're looking at a clinical study report. And so you could use this for in-text data or in-text tables and including appendix related items. So two examples we want to go is let's look at analysis data set and adding that. So in here, I'm going to just pull in this data set. We loaded this previously, and I'm going to select for the types of columns that I'd like to see. I can go ahead and have that populate, save, and preview what this would look like. So in this case, I'm previewing what this table would look like, this analysis data set, if I were to generate this for me to write with or manipulate. Now, I can do so as a draft data set, a draft table. So if I wanted to do that, I could work ahead and shell this out with the draft. Again, by using this, as long as I upload my final, it will refresh and repopulate this here. And I can do that at any point as a medical writer. If I like what I see, I go ahead and hit generate, and then that's going to populate that table for us. If I just jump down here, I've done so before our call, and you can see now you have this table, and you can make any edits to it, formats, whatever you need to do right in the interface. Another example of the data integration, let's look again at it, but a different format, is using TFLs. So let me look at our tables, listings, and figures. In this example, I uploaded a file in the RTF format. Again, I can just pull, drag and drop in. I can save. This could either be a draft table or the final. If it's draft, I'm going to see the draft representation. If it's final, it would just refresh over this. Here you can see the same thing. I can see the table, what this would look like, where I had to generate this. So again, you would just go down here and generate it, and I've already done so before our webinar. And so it will jump over here, and it's going to look at what that generated table looks like. In this example, I actually locked this so that I know, or other medical writers know, this should not be altered or this should not be touched, so we don't need to QC it because it's been locked. Here I see the representation, and we can see the table that's been generated in the software. Now that we've looked at some of the examples in the software, we want to talk about the benefits of applying these kind of concepts through technology and how they help writers and teams. So the first one we want to talk about is structured content authoring. The first one shouldn't be a surprise, but reduce those timelines, right? Those are the cycle times we talked about before. And so structured content authoring really eliminates and reduces the rewriting and editing of previously written information. And so just having a smaller amount of text or content that needs to be edited or rewritten, that alone dramatically reduces timelines and cycle times. The second major benefit is allowing content to be written in parallel. So typically what we see medical writing teams have historically written things in a linear type of fashion, often sometimes called waterfall, in which if a writer A starts and then writer B has to start only after writer A is finished, and so on and so forth, that means that effectively we have to wait for everyone to finish their part before we can complete ours or even start our part. And so what structured content authoring allows is for writers to write in parallel for those pieces of content that are not dependent on one another. And that allows for more parallelization of writing that really addresses the cycle times we talked about. The third major benefit, and this is really for maybe more senior level writers or even stakeholders in the organization, is allowing metrics to be surfaced about medical writing. And so what we mean by that is you can have information and metrics around content. You can do it for tasks or even status. A great one for content is you can see, let's say you wrote a summary, you can see how does this summary compare to the previously written summary. Is it 500 words versus it was previously 300 words? And you can start to get a sense for where inefficiencies or efficiencies are being baked into a different type of report or from report to report. The other one is tasks. So oftentimes you can really get focused with your tasks or writing because you don't have to look at an entire report. You can look at a piece of content or a section of content that's specific to your role or your task. And then the last one is status. So in medical writing, teams often have to manage timelines and they have to give updates and whatnot. So having a structured content authoring, you can actually see in real time how different pieces of content are being worked on or finalized. And so it automates a lot of the status updates because you can see them in real time as they're progressing. And there's no kind of third-party project manager or project management tool that you need to go and update on a cadence, because as a writer progresses, the work there in front of you updates itself. There are other numerous benefits to structured content authoring, and again, it really depends on how you use a tool like Synchronous Writer or what is important to your organization. The next set of benefits we want to go over is data integration. So the first, and I'd say the most prominent benefit for the data integration concept is this ability to reduce the post-final data timelines, allowing teams to really focus on that messaging and relevance from a confirmation perspective versus a writing perspective. So what we mean by that is that because you can collapse down the post-database lock finalization timeframe, you can really allow writers to actually spend more time writing and focusing on that versus dealing with getting the data into the reports. And so this just allows them to do better authoring, and it reduces the timeline as well. The second one is data integration really allows teams to build authoring templates that automatically populate not only with content, but also data itself. So what we mean by that is that if you have a piece of data or a table or a draft data set, let's say, or draft table, you can build out a report that has that. And then once data has actually come in that is reflective or it's final, you can automatically refresh that in the system, and it pre-populates right there in the report for you. And so it really allows for once final data is coming in to automatically populate that, and it really cuts down on a lot of back and forth, especially between the biostats and medical writing teams. And the third benefit, which we've really seen in the last 6 to 12 months, is really starting to become a really big benefit, is this concept of reducing the QC time associated with steps for copy and paste. And so kind of the industry standard for a number of years was I have some data, or I have a table, let's say, and I want to take that from a PDF or an RTF file or a table somewhere and copy that into a report that I have to write. And so having the data integration where the data just automatically populates in the report for you can really reduce the amount of QC time, because you're actually not physically touching the data that's already been produced and validated from another team like Biostat. So you can literally just have it generated in the report, write your conclusions, and lock it down so that you can be 100% sure that that data has not been touched by anybody. Again, these are 3 of the main benefits, but there's a lot of other benefits with the data integration. We do want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So we'll go through the questions we've had in the chat, and if we do not get to your questions today, we'd be happy to follow up and make sure we address those. So the first question's around combining these 2 concepts. So meaning that can you combine the data integration and structured content authoring together? So the answer is yes. As you saw in the demonstration of the software, you have both accessible to you, and so you can utilize data integration, you can utilize structured content authoring, and oftentimes writers who do so actually yield a better result or more efficient result in their cycle time. A great example, just a very simple example, could be if you, for instance, write a section of a CSR that is non-data dependent, and you could write that ahead of final database lock and lock it down and complete it, so you don't need to come back to that. Whereas a section that is data dependent, let's say like efficacy, you could refresh the data that goes into there and write your conclusion and not have to go back to that first section because it was done and it doesn't have any data outcomes in it. And so it's a very common use case to combine both techniques. The next question's come up a couple times. What is an output? So the output of this particular product, Signature Genetics Writer, is a Word file. So essentially, it's going to export a Word document that should be submission ready, and hopefully you just put it in your document management system and store it off for future referencing if needed. Okay, the next one is, doesn't writing with using draft data increase the writing time or in the QC time because you have to redo it all? It's a really good question. So in traditional writing software, the answer was used historically yes, but in this particular product, Signature Genetics Writer, the answer is no, because when you have a refresh of data, that simply uploads to the system, and you get prompted, would you like to refresh this? You're going to click yes, and then it automatically populates in the report for you. So you don't have to, if you use a draft table, for example, you don't have to have everyone's review, and then after the review, delete it out and add the new one. It just automatically populates for you. It's a very common practice. And then as a follow-up to that, what type of data can be added? So this really depends on the type of report you're writing. So for example, in patient narratives, you're going to use something like an SDTM file. And so that's typically loaded in like a SAS7B DAT or a CSV or an XBT form. Whereas if you're writing a clinical study report in the software, you're going to be dealing with tables, figures, and listings. So you might have, some tables, some image files, some PNGs. You might have some RTF files as well, and so that would be supported for like a clinical study report. So it does support multiple different data inputs and data formats. It really just depends on the type of report you're writing. I know we have several other questions, and we really won't have time to get to all of them, but thank you for sending them, and we will follow up with you. Thank you for attending today. Again, this topic was expediting the medical writing process by applying data integration and structured content authoring. My name is Trevor Standish. I'm the Director of Product Management here at Certara, and thank you for attending.